The track. The town of Harlow Creek didn't appear on most maps. Not because it was hidden, but because it never seemed worth marking. A smudge of gray houses pressed into the valley, between two mountains that had already given everything they had to give. The mines had been the lifeblood of this place once. Now they were mostly scars, deep ones. You could tell the story of Harlow Creek just by looking at its hands. Every man over 40 had fingers bent like old roots, black crescents under the nails that never quite scrubbed clean. The women held things tighter than they needed to, coffee mugs, door frames, the hands of their children, like they were always bracing for something to be taken away. There were about 65 families in Harlow Creek, give or take a few. Most had been there for 3 generations, some 4. They didn't leave, not because they didn't want to, but because wanting something and having the means to get it are two very different things, and Harlow Creek had run out of means a long time ago. The town had one gas station that doubled as a pharmacy, one school that went K through 12 under the same leaking roof, one church with a broken organ that the pastor played anyway, one off-key note at a time. There was a diner called Ruthie's, and Ruthie herself had been dead for 11 years, but nobody had the heart to change the sign. This is where Jordy grew up. Jordan Ellis, 17 years old, 5'10" and built like a young bull. Not from a gym, not from training, but from years of hauling equipment alongside his father, down in the mines. His hands were already starting to look like his dad's. That bothered him sometimes, late at night. Not because he was ashamed of his father. He wasn't. His father was the best man he knew. It bothered him because it meant time was already moving. His dad, Gerald Ellis, was 53 and looked 70. The mines had taken years off the man the way compound interest works in reverse, slow at first, then all at once. His back curved when he stood. His knees clicked loud enough to hear across a room. He still got up at 5 in the morning, out of pure muscle memory, even though he hadn't been cleared for a full shift in 2 years. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his coffee and stare out the window at the mountain, and not say much. Jordy's mom, Darlene, kept the house together the way women in Harlow Creek did, fiercely and quietly. She worked the front desk at the school 4 days a week, and sold handmade quilts out of the back of the family truck when she could find a market willing to pay. She sang while she cooked. Always. Even when things were bad, she sang. And then there was Maisie, 8 years old, gap-toothed and wild-haired, and obsessed with drawing horses, even though she'd never been within 50 feet of one. Maisie had the kind of laugh that could make a whole room turn around and smile without knowing why. Jordy would do anything for that laugh. He'd been doing anything for it his whole life. The letter came on a Tuesday. It came for every family in Harlow Creek at the same time. A plain white envelope with a government seal in the top corner. No return address beyond the seal. The paper inside was thick, the kind of thick that means someone spent money on it, and the words were official and cold and exactly the sort of language that the people of Harlow Creek had learned to distrust. But they read it, every word. The government had a program. It had existed for decades, run quietly in places like Harlow Creek, communities that had fallen through the cracks of the economy, where no amount of policy had managed to stick. The program wasn't welfare. It wasn't a grant or a loan or a subsidy. The letter was specific about that. It was a competition. Once every 25 years, the program was activated in a qualifying community. Each of the 65 families would select one representative. That representative would compete in an endurance event, a walking race, held on a sanctioned track at the regional arena 40 miles from town. The event would run continuously until only one competitor remained on the track. No running required, just walking, staying on your feet. The winner would receive a lifetime stipend. Monthly payments, adjusted for inflation, sufficient to fully support the winner and their immediate living family. For life. Every month. No conditions beyond one. The winnings could not be shared with any other competing family. The letter explained the philosophy plainly. The government believed that opportunity, true opportunity, lived inside the human body. Inside the will. That hard work and the endurance to outlast hardship were the foundations of an extraordinary life. The event was designed to prove it. The event had a name. The track. And it was held in 30 days. Gerald Ellis read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and set it on the table and looked at his son. Jordy already knew. It's gotta be you, his father said. Not a question, just a fact arriving at its destination. I know, Dad. Your legs are good. Better than mine ever were at your age. All that time down in the shaft with me, you've got stamina in you, son. You just don't know how to find it yet. Darlene was leaning against the counter. She hadn't moved since they'd read the letter. Her eyes were somewhere between hope and the specific grief of not letting yourself hope too much. He's 17, she said. The letter says 12 and up, Gerald replied. Harlow Creek has families with no one better to send. 60-year-old grandmothers. Kids younger than Maisie will be someday. He paused. Jordy's the strongest person in this house. That's just the truth. Maisie was at the kitchen table drawing a horse. She looked up. Is Jordy gonna win something? Nobody answered her right away. Jordy crouched down next to her chair. I'm gonna try, Bug. She went back to drawing. Okay, draw me something too when you get back. He laughed. He didn't tell her it wasn't that kind of competition. He just kissed the top of her head and looked up at his parents and said, I'll do it. The arena was something none of them had ever seen up close. It sat outside a mid-sized city, 40 miles east of Harlow Creek, a concrete structure that had been built for regional track and field competitions, but had been repurposed every 25 years for this. The seating held 12,000 people. The track inside was standard, 400 meters per lap, rubberized surface, lane markers still faintly painted from the last actual athletics meet. Jordy arrived the morning before the event with his family, who had driven in the old truck with a thermos of coffee, and Maisie asleep across the back seat. They weren't the only ones. Cars and old vans and trucks streamed into the arena parking lot from every direction. 65 families, 65 competitors, stepping out of vehicles and looking around at each other with expressions that mixed determination and exhaustion and quiet desperation in proportions that varied, family by family. Some competitors arrived in warm-up gear, compression socks, new shoes, duffel bags that clearly contained nutrition plans and muscle rubs and things that had required research and preparation. You could pick those people out from 100 yards, the ones who had been waiting for this for years, who had structured their lives around the possibility of this envelope arriving. Jordy arrived in jeans and a flannel shirt because he hadn't owned track clothes and hadn't thought to buy any. His mother hugged him for a long time at the entrance gate. His father shook his hand, the full grip, both hands wrapped around Jordy's, eyes level. That was Gerald's version of everything he couldn't say. Maisie drew a horse on a piece of paper and pressed it into his hand. For good luck, she said. He folded it carefully and put it in his front pocket. Then he walked through the gate. The competitors gathered on the infield before the start. 65 people of various ages and shapes and states of readiness, milling around on the grass, while officials in matching polo shirts circulated with clipboards and wristbands. Jordy scanned the crowd. He saw a man who had to be in his mid-60s, lean and weathered, doing slow, deliberate stretches with the patience of someone who understood their own body completely. He saw a girl who couldn't have been more than 13, standing close to the fence, staring at the track with enormous eyes. He saw a woman in her 40s, with calves like a cyclist, who was chatting easily with the officials like she'd done this before. And then he saw Flo. You couldn't miss him. He was standing apart from the rest of the group, near the far edge of the infield, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes on the track. He was 23. He was built like something that had been engineered rather than born. Not bulky, but dense, every visible muscle the result of deliberate and sustained effort. He wore a fitted black long-sleeve shirt and compression tights, and shoes that probably cost more than a week of groceries in Harlow Creek. His hair was close-cropped. His face gave nothing away. Someone near Jordy said his name, or tried to. Hey, what's your name? The guy looked over without turning his head much. Flo. Your real name? Flo. And then he went back to staring at the track. Nobody approached him again. Jordy watched him for a moment. He didn't feel intimidated exactly. He felt something more specific than that. He felt like he was looking at a man who had already decided the outcome, and was now just waiting for the world to catch up. That bothered Jordy less than it probably should have. He turned around and nearly walked into a girl his age, maybe a year older, with a dark ponytail and an annoyed expression. Watch it, she said. Sorry, he stepped back. Jordy. She looked at him with the practiced suspicion of someone who'd been burned by friendliness before. Then something in his face must have passed her test, because she said, Chelsea. You from around here? Harlow Creek, other side of town. She tilted her head. You're an Ellis, Gerald's son. She nodded, like that explained something. My dad's sick, mom's got bad knees, I'm it. She said it matter-of-factly, no performance of tragedy. Just the shape of things. Same. My dad can't walk a full shift anymore, I'm the one. He paused. You trained? She looked at him. Did you? I work in the mines. I wait tables 12 hours a day and walk 2 miles home because we don't have a second car. She shrugged one shoulder. That's my training. Jordy almost smiled. Guess we're both real prepared. A third voice appeared beside them. I did actually train. Bit. Not obsessively or anything. Mostly because my parents thought it would be fun. The voice belonged to a broad-shouldered guy in his mid-20s with an easy grin and expensive sneakers. Chuck, my family's from the North End. Jordy knew what that meant. The North End was the part of Harlow Creek that wasn't quite as Harlow Creek as the rest of it. The families who still had savings, whose houses had 2 floors, who drove cars that didn't need to be coaxed into starting. Why did they pick you? Chelsea asked with her characteristic bluntness. Chuck didn't flinch. Because I volunteered. My parents didn't need to send me. I wanted to come. He paused. Is that weird? Yes, said Chelsea. Kind of, said Jordy. Fair. Chuck shrugged. I figured once every 25 years. When else am I going to have a story like this? Jordy looked at him. There was something genuine in the guy, underneath the ease. He filed it away. The officials blew their whistles. It was time to get on the track. 12,000 seats. Jordy hadn't expected this many people. They filled the arena like a living wave. Families of the competitors, people from the surrounding region, television cameras on rolling rigs along the infield. There was an announcer's booth above the main straightaway. A scoreboard that displayed each competitor's family name and a lap counter. Music played from the speakers as they lined up. Something orchestral and swelling that felt slightly too large for the moment. The official at the microphone explained the rules one final time. Walk. Stay in your lane. You may slow, stop briefly to stretch, or use the designated rest areas at the ends of the track. Eat and drink from the provided stations at every quarter lap. If both knees touch the ground at the same time, you are disqualified. If you step off the track without returning within 5 minutes, you are disqualified. Medical staff are available at all times. You may withdraw voluntarily at any point. Last person walking wins. He paused, and then he said something that Jordy would think about later, when everything hurt and the night was deep and dark. This event has been held 14 times across this country, in communities like yours. 12 times, the winner was not the favorite. 12 times, the winner was the one who wanted it not just in their muscles, but somewhere deeper. We are honored to witness what lives in all of you. The gun went off. They walked. The first few hours were almost pleasant. 65 people moving in a loose pack around the 400-meter loop, the crowd buzzing and cheering. The track surface soft under their feet. Jordy kept a steady pace, not fast, not slow. He thought about his father's hands on his shoulders that morning and tried to put everything else out of his mind. Chuck fell into step beside him early on, and then Chelsea appeared on his other side, and without any formal discussion, the three of them became a small unit moving through the larger crowd. That Flo guy is already 2 laps ahead of everyone, Chuck observed. Jordy glanced up the track. It was true. Flo had set a pace that was brisk without being aggressive. A long, efficient stride that ate distance without appearing to hurry. He wasn't running, but he was pulling away. He's trying to intimidate people, Chelsea said. It's working, said Chuck. Let him, said Jordy. This isn't about pace. It's about how long you can keep moving. Chuck looked at him. Have you done this before? No, but I've spent 8-hour shifts in a mine. When you can't afford to burn out, you learn what burns. They walked. By hour 6, the first competitor dropped. An older man, one of the 60-year-olds, sat down carefully on the infield grass and waved off the medical team with a tired dignity. His family came down from the stands. His wife held his hand. The crowd applauded him, long and warm, and he raised one hand in acknowledgement, without looking up. Jordy watched it happen from across the track. He felt the weight of it. 64 families left with a chance. One family's hope, folded up and walked home. By hour 12, 7 more had dropped. A 12-year-old boy sat down crying, his legs cramped beyond his control. His father came down from the stands and picked him up like he was still small, and the crowd was quieter for that one. More tender. Chelsea had been quiet for the last hour. Jordy glanced at her. How are your feet? Fine. A pause. Blisters. You need to go to the rest station. I'm fine. Chelsea. He said it levelly. Blisters that you ignore on day 1 become wounds on day 3. Go get them wrapped. She looked at him like she was deciding whether to be annoyed. Then she said, You sound like you know things. My dad got a blood infection from a foot blister he ignored on a long shift. He was in the hospital for 10 days. Jordy kept walking. Go get them wrapped. She peeled off toward the rest station. She came back 15 minutes later with her feet properly taped and didn't thank him, but she walked closer after that. Night fell. The arena lights came up, huge banks of white that turned the track into something lunar and strange. The crowd had thinned. Many people had gone to hotels or sleeping areas set up outside, planning to rotate back in. But a core stayed. Families who couldn't afford to look away. Jordy's family was in section C, row 12. He could see his mother's face when he passed the main straightaway on each lap. She wasn't watching nervously. She was watching steadily, the way she always did. The way she sang even when things were hard, with a kind of anchored grace that he had always admired, without having the words for it. Maisie had fallen asleep against his father's arm. Even from the track, Jordy could see his father's hand resting on the top of her head. He kept walking. Chuck was telling him a story about a camping trip gone wrong, somewhere in the mountains. Jordy was only half listening, but it helped to have the voice. It helped to have the motion of words in the air around you, when the body was beginning its first quiet negotiations about how long this was really going to go on. 48 competitors remained when the first night slipped into the second morning. Flo had not looked at anyone. Hour 20. The track had become a different place. What had started as a crowded, buzzing event had settled into something more grim and more real. 43 competitors now. The ones who remained walked with the slower, deliberate gait of people conserving carefully. Conversations had thinned. Faces had hardened into whatever private fuel each person was burning. The crowd felt it too. Quieter now. More attentive. The cheers came in waves rather than constantly. Bursts when someone fell, or when someone pushed through a visible moment of struggle, or when a competitor from a beloved family crested the far turn and the section where their family sat roared them forward. Geordie was hurting. Not badly, not yet, not in the way he knew was coming, but the soles of his feet had passed through the stage of soreness and arrived at a duller, more persistent ache. His lower back was tight. His left knee was sending occasional dispatches that he acknowledged and set aside. He ate at every station. He drank consistently. He did not push pace. He had promised himself these things, and he held to them. Chelsea was struggling more than she let on. She had stopped talking 2 hours ago and was moving with her jaw set and her eyes on the track directly in front of her feet, 6 inches at a time. Geordie matched his pace to hers without making it obvious. "Tell me about your dad," he said eventually. She glanced up. "Why?" "Because you need to think about something other than your feet." A long pause. The crowd murmured somewhere behind them. "He used to sing," she said, "when I was small. These old country songs he only half remembered. He'd make up the parts he forgot." A trace of a smile. "He's got this big voice for a small man. You'd be surprised. You'd hear him and look around for someone twice his size." "What happened to him?" "His lungs. Same as half the men in Harlow Creek, I think. The dust gets in and it just stays." She was quiet. "He can't walk up the stairs anymore without stopping twice." Geordie nodded. "He didn't want to send me," she added. "He cried. My mom held him and they both cried, and I told them I wanted to go. I do want to go." She looked at the track. "But you can miss someone and still choose to do the thing." "Yeah," said Geordie, "you can." Chuck came up from behind them, breathing with deliberate control. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're both going to outlast half these people." "How are you doing?" Geordie asked him. Chuck thought about it. "My knees have filed a formal complaint. I'm reviewing their concerns." Geordie laughed. Genuinely. It surprised him, the way real laughter still surprises you when you're in pain, like a reminder that you're still more than the hurting. Hour 29. Chelsea dropped. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about it that hit Geordie hardest. She didn't fall. She didn't collapse. She just walked to the infield and sat down with the careful precision of someone who had made a decision, and then she put her face in her hands. Geordie crossed over to her immediately. The officials noted it and waved their clearance. Competitors were permitted brief infield contact with withdrawing participants before the family came down. He crouched in front of her. She looked up. Her eyes were red. "My hip," she said. "It's not going to hold. I could push through it, but the medic said if I do, I risk." She stopped, shook her head. "I can't come home injured. My family needs me to walk in on my own 2 feet. Her voice cracked on the last 3 words. She swallowed it back down. "You made it 29 hours, Geordie said. "It's not enough." "No, but it's real. You really did this. 29 hours, Chelsea. Your dad's going to hear that and feel something. I promise you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out and gripped his forearm with both hands, hard. "You win this," she said. "You hear me? You win this." He put his hand over hers. "I hear you." Her family was coming down the aisle. Geordie stood and went back to the track. Hour 36. 29 competitors. Flow had not wavered. Not once. He moved with the same long rhythmic stride, slightly ahead of the main cluster. Never looking into the stands. Never eating more than what was necessary. Never visibly struggling. He had become something of a focal point for the crowd. There was a section near the far curve that had started chanting his name. His family, presumably, though Geordie still knew almost nothing about him. Chuck had developed a slight limp, but was managing it with the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that acknowledgement is the same as defeat. "Tell me honestly," Geordie said during a quiet stretch. "Why are you still here? You said your family doesn't need this." Chuck walked quietly for a moment. "My parents never needed anything from me," he said finally. "That sounds like a good problem to have, and I know it is. But there's something strange about being the kid whose parents are fine no matter what." He paused. "I wanted to do something that was hard, something I might not finish, something that would tell me something about myself that easy living doesn't." Geordie looked at him. Has it? Chuck thought. Still finding out. They walked. Hour 42. Chuck sat down. He'd pushed for 2 hours past what Geordie thought his body would allow. He'd done it on pure will and humor, and something Geordie had come to recognize as a quiet, stubborn decency. When his knee finally locked up, genuinely locked, a seized joint that sent him stumbling, he caught himself on the track rail, stood still for a long moment, and then walked to the infield, with his head up. He found Geordie on the next lap, stood at the rail. "Still in it?" he called. Geordie raised a hand. "Good. Don't stop." Geordie didn't. #5, the third day. Hour 51. 14 competitors remained. Jordy had passed through several distinct chambers of pain, and come out the other side of each one into something that wasn't comfort exactly, but was a kind of numbness that allowed continuation. His feet were wrapped twice now, his lower back had stopped its protests and settled into a constant, manageable presence. He had learned to read his body the way you learn to read weather, what was dangerous and what was just noise. He ate, he drank, he walked. The arena was different now. The crowd had compressed, the casual observers had gone, and what remained were the families and the devoted. The atmosphere was no longer festive, it was something between a vigil and a contest. The kind of attention that only comes when people understand that what they're watching is real. Flo was still walking. There were now only 3 laps of separation between him and Jordy. As the field had shrunk, Flo had eased his pace slightly. There was no longer a reason to push forward. The calculus had changed from distance to duration. Jordy noticed that Flo had started watching the other competitors, not blankly, assessing, watching their gait, their faces, their hands. He was reading the room the way a chess player reads a board, not just where the pieces are, but where they're going. For the first time, Flo looked at Jordy. Not a glance, a look. Sustained, evaluating. Jordy looked back. Something passed between them. Not hostility, not exactly. Recognition. 2 people who had assessed each other and arrived at the same conclusion. This is the one. Flo looked away. Jordy kept walking. Hour 60. 7 competitors. An older woman named Margaret, who had walked with extraordinary steadiness for 2.5 days, sat down slowly near the first turn water station. Her hands shook as she accepted a blanket from the medical staff. She had gone further than anyone in Harlow Creek had expected, and perhaps further than she had expected too. She looked at the track one more time before they let her off. The look of someone saying goodbye to something they'd come to know. The 7 remaining were Jordy, Flo, a 44-year-old man named Reeves, who had barely spoken to anyone. A woman in her 30s who moved with the focused silence of someone running calculations. 2 men in their 20s who had been together since the start, from different towns, who had formed an unlikely alliance, and a 61-year-old named Harold who had outlasted everyone's expectations by approximately 40 hours. Harold was walking with a cane he'd been permitted as an approved mobility aid. He moved slowly, but he moved. Jordy came alongside him on a backstretch during hour 61. "You all right?" Jordy asked. Harold looked at him sideways. "Does it matter?" "Suppose not. Just asking." Harold considered this. "My wife has early dementia," he said. "I'm the one who takes care of her. If I had a stipend, I could get her real care, good care, the kind that costs what we don't have." Jordy said nothing because there was nothing to say that was equal to that. "You?" Harold said. "My dad's broken from the mines. Mom works too hard. Little sister." He paused. "The usual." Harold nodded, like that was exactly what he'd expected. "You walk well for someone young," Harold said. "Not flashy, steady. Learned from my dad." They walked a lap in silence. Then Jordy moved ahead, gently, because he needed to keep pace. He would think about Harold for a long time afterward. Hour 68. 3 competitors. Reeves had gone at hour 63, going out with the same silence he'd maintained for the entire event. No drama, just a slow walk to the infield and a handshake with the officials. The woman in her 30s had made it to hour 66 before her Achilles gave out, a real injury, and the medical team had insisted. The 2 allies had lasted until 67, one dropping, then the other following 20 minutes later, as though they had made a private agreement. Harold had finally sat down at hour 67.5, outlasting everyone's expectations by what felt like at least a day. When he crossed off the track, the remaining crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. He raised his cane once in acknowledgement, then walked slowly to where his daughter was waiting. Now it was just Jordy and Flo. The track felt enormous. The crowd felt enormous. 12,000 seats, and however many people filled them, all pointed at 2 young men walking circles in the night. They had not yet spoken. Part 6. The 4th day, hour 72. They walked. The silence between Jordy and Flo had a texture to it by now. It wasn't hostile. It was 2 people conserving everything. Breath, thought, emotion. Because this was the stage where everything counted and nothing could be wasted. But somewhere around hour 73, Flo began to drift slightly in his lane. Just slightly. An inch or 2 toward the inside on the curves. His stride was still powerful, but Jordy had begun to notice the things that the crowd probably couldn't see from the stands. The fractional pause before each step. The way Flo's head had dropped an inch lower than it had been. The slight rolling of his shoulders that hadn't been there 20 hours ago. He was still formidable. He was still extraordinary. But he was human. They came around the far turn on the same lap. Jordy had closed the distance over the past several hours, and for the first time, they were side by side. Flo looked straight ahead. After a silence, Jordy said, "How long have you been training for this?" A pause. 19 years. Jordy absorbed that. "You were 4. My father started me at 4. No emotion in the words, just fact. "He runs your training?" Flo's jaw tightened slightly. "He owns it." Jordy let that sit. He thought about his own father, the handshake at the gate, the steady eyes, the hand on Maisie's head, the pride that had never needed to be announced because it was built into everything the man did. "He must be proud of how far you've gotten," Jordy offered. Flo said nothing for almost a full lap. Then, "He would only be proud of what I bring home." Jordy looked at him. "Everything I've ever done in my life," Flo said quietly, in a voice that had shed its armor somewhere around hour 73, "has been in pursuit of the moment he looks at me like I'm worth something. I stopped knowing if I wanted this for me a long time ago." A pause. "But I still want it." Jordy was quiet. They walked. After a while, Jordy said, "My dad looked at me like I was worth something before I ever did anything to earn it. I've spent 17 years thinking maybe I didn't deserve it. Maybe this is me trying to prove I do." Flo glanced at him, the first full look he'd given anyone in 4 days. "Neither of us are doing this entirely for ourselves," Jordy said. "No," Flo agreed. They walked another lap in silence, but it was a different silence now. Hour 78. Flo was struggling. He wasn't going to say so. He wasn't built for saying so. But his stride had shortened noticeably, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that hadn't come from effort alone. His legs, those perfectly engineered instruments that had been prepared for this day since before he could properly remember, were beginning to fail him. Jordy felt it happening in real time, the shift in the air between them. He didn't celebrate it. He looked at the man beside him, a man he'd spent 4 days thinking of as an obstacle, who had turned out to be something much more recognizable, and felt something he hadn't expected. Sorrow. "Flo," he said, "don't. I'm not going to tell you to stop. I'm asking how you are." Silence. "My right calf," Flo said finally. "It's been cramping since hour 70. I've been managing it." "Are you managing it?" Another silence. Less so. Jordy thought about what he was doing, even as he did it. It cost him nothing in terms of the competition. Nothing he said would change what was happening in Flo's body. But he moved slightly closer. "Shorten your stride a little. Take some pressure off the calf. It slows you down, but it's more sustainable." Flo looked at him sideways. "Why are you helping me?" Jordy thought about it. "Because I want to win. Not because you quit, because I lasted longer." A flicker of something crossed Flo's face. It might have been respect. He shortened his stride. They walked. Hour 84. The crowd had been going for a long time. Families of both remaining competitors filled opposite sides of the arena. But the sound had blended into something unified. 12,000 people, bearing witness to 2 young men who refused to stop, long past the point where stopping would have been forgivable. Chelsea was in the stands. Chuck was beside her. Jordy could hear them sometimes on the main straight, Chelsea's voice cutting through the crowd noise like a blade, calling his name. He held on to that. Flo had stopped talking. He walked with his head down, each step extracted from his body by pure will. He was no longer the composed, engineered athlete from the first day. He was something rawer, something almost beautiful in its refusal. Jordy was hurting too, not more than Flo, but honestly, deeply. His feet were 2 pillars of dull fire. His back had stopped sending individual complaints, and had merged them into a single, constant presence. His vision swam occasionally on the far turns, where the lights were less intense. But he was still walking. He had been walking for 84 hours. He thought about Maisie's horse drawing, folded in his pocket, slightly damp now from sweat and time. He thought about his mother's face in Section C. He thought about his father's hands. He kept walking. Hour 91. Flo went down, not all at once. It happened in stages. The shortening of stride that Jordy had noticed hours ago finally narrowed to almost nothing. Then Flo's pace slowed to something barely distinguishable from standing. Then his right leg buckled, just slightly, a tremor, but enough, and he caught himself on the track rail with both hands. He stood there for 30 seconds. The crowd had gone almost completely silent. Jordy stopped. He walked back to where Flo was standing. "I'm not done," Flo said through his teeth. "Okay. Don't look at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything." Flo pushed off the rail and tried to take a step. His right leg shook. He took the step anyway, and another. Jordy fell in beside him. They walked, slowly, slower than they had walked at any point in 4 days, but they walked. "Why are you still here?" Flo said. "Just keep going. You're ahead." "There's no clock," Jordy said. "Just keep moving." They did one more lap. The crowd was barely breathing. And then on the back straight, with no grandeur and no warning, Flo simply stopped. He stood still for a moment. Then he sat down, on the track, not on the infield, on the track itself, in lane 3, as though he wanted to be exactly where he'd been for 4 days, when the thing finally ended. He put his arms on his knees, and his forehead on his arms. The officials moved forward. The arena exploded. Part 7. After. Geordie stood on the track. He stood there for a long moment, in the noise, in the light, in the middle of something he couldn't quite hold yet. 12,000 people were on their feet. The scoreboard was flashing. Officials were moving toward him with a sash and a microphone, and the formal apparatus of a win. He looked at Flo first. Flo was still sitting on the track. He hadn't moved. His head was still down. Geordie walked over and crouched in front of him. "Hey." Flo looked up. His eyes were red. Not from crying, from 4 days of fluorescent light and exhaustion and something deeper. He looked like a man who had given everything he had, and found himself on the wrong side of the number. "I was supposed to win," Flo said. "I've done everything right for 19 years. I know. I don't understand why." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I don't understand what I did wrong." Geordie looked at him. "You didn't do anything wrong. I was just standing a little longer than you. That's all it is." Flo looked at the track. "Your dad's going to. I know what my dad's going to do." Geordie was quiet. Then he said, "What do you want to do, after this, on your own?" Flo frowned slightly, like the question had come from an unexpected direction. He paused. "I've never really thought about that." "Maybe start there," Geordie said. "Maybe that's the thing 19 years of your father's training couldn't give you." Flo looked at him for a long time. Then the officials arrived, and gently guided Geordie to his feet, and the ceremony began. And the arena was very loud. Darlene Ellis came down from the stands at a run. She hadn't run in years. Her knees complained the whole way, and she didn't care at all. She hit Geordie in the main straightaway and held him so hard he could feel her shaking, and he held her back just as hard. His father came behind her, moving carefully on his damaged knees, and put both hands on Geordie's face, the way he had when Geordie was small, the way he hadn't done in years, and just looked at him. "My boy," he said. That was all. Maisie pushed through between them and grabbed Geordie around the middle and yelled something that got lost in the crowd noise, but whose meaning was perfectly clear. He picked her up and held her and looked at the lights. Chelsea found him 20 minutes later, after the officials had processed the formal win and the media had taken their photographs and the stipend paperwork had been signed and witnessed and sealed. She came through the barrier with Chuck right behind her, and she grabbed his arm with both hands again, the way she had when she withdrew. And this time she was crying a little, which he could tell she found annoying, and he pretended not to notice. "I told you," she said. "You did. Don't make it weird. Never." Chuck clapped him on the back with a broad hand. "I'm putting this story in my personal memoir," he announced. Chapter title: "The Time My Friend Geordie Walked for 4 Days and Changed My Life." "We've known each other 4 days, Geordie said. "Formative ones." Geordie laughed. His whole body hurt when he laughed, and he didn't care, even slightly. He found Flo near the edge of the infield, sitting alone with a bottle of water, watching the arena empty out. Geordie sat down next to him. They didn't say anything for a while. The lights were starting to dim in sections. The families were filing out. The track, that 400-meter loop they'd spent 4 days on that had become the whole world, sat empty and quiet. "What happens now?" Geordie said. "For you?" Flo thought. "I go home. And tell your dad." A pause. "Yeah. Will you be okay?" Flo looked at him sideways. "That's a strange question from the guy who just beat me." "Probably, but I'm still asking." Flo was quiet for a long time. The arena was mostly empty now. Their breath made small clouds in the cold arena air. "I've been so locked into this," Flo said finally, "that I don't actually know who I am outside of it. I've never had to find out." He turned the water bottle in his hands. "That's more frightening than losing, honestly." "Then find out," Geordie said simply. Flo looked at him. "You can walk," Geordie said. 91 hours. You have got more in you than most people will ever know. Whatever you choose to do with that, it doesn't have to be for him." Something shifted in Flo's face. Not relief, not resolution, something more preliminary, the first light of a question being seriously considered for the first time. "You're strange for a 17-year-old, Flo said. "I'll take it." Flo extended a hand. Geordie shook it. It was the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. #Epilogue, the life after. The monthly payments began 6 weeks later. The first check, direct deposit into an account Geordie had never had before, with a balance he had to read twice to believe, arrived on a Tuesday morning. Geordie was sitting at the kitchen table. His mother was at the counter. His father was in his chair by the window, coffee in hand, watching the mountain. Geordie turned his phone so they could both see the screen. His mother made a sound he had never heard from her before. Not a cry exactly, not laughter, something that lived in the gap between them. His father looked at the number for a long time. Then he looked at his son. "You did good," Gerald Ellis said. That was all he needed to say. Within a year, Things had changed in ways that were both enormous and quiet. Gerald's back was treated by a specialist in the city, the kind of specialist with equipment and time and the willingness to explain things. And while the mines had done damage that couldn't be fully undone, the treatment gave him 30 degrees of additional range and a reduction in daily pain that made him a different man to live with, a lighter one. Darlene quit the school desk job and spent 2 days a week doing what she actually loved, which was making things with her hands. Not just quilts now, but furniture, cabinetry, work that required tools and space and time, all of which they finally had. She started teaching a workshop on Saturdays in the building that used to be the town's second hardware store. Maisie got riding lessons. She turned out to be gifted. The horse drawings gave way to the real thing, and the real thing turned out to suit her. The patience required, the communication, the partnership with something large and alive and honest. She would spend most of the next decade with horses. Geordie would go to every competition he could. Geordie himself went back to Harlow Creek first. He wasn't sure where he wanted to be or what he wanted to do, but he knew he didn't want to leave until he understood what staying had meant. He spent a year there, helped where he could, walked the streets at night sometimes, the way you walk through a place when you're trying to memorize it before something changes. Then he went to college. Not because the stipend demanded it, but because he found out he was curious, deeply, genuinely curious about how things worked, how systems worked, how communities failed and recovered, what made some places survive and others disappear. He studied things that didn't have obvious applications. He took his time. Chelsea went back to caring for her parents and used the attention the event had generated to start something she'd been turning over in her mind for years. A community health navigation service in Harlow Creek and 3 surrounding towns, helping families find and access the medical resources that existed but were invisible to people without the time or knowledge to find them. It grew slowly. Then, faster. Her father heard about it. He cried again. Chuck wrote his memoir. It was funny and strange and unexpectedly moving, and sold well in a regional market that had never produced much of that kind of book. He dedicated it to 65 families in a town called Harlow Creek. And Flo went home and had the conversation with his father that he had been dreading his whole life. It went poorly. His father said things that couldn't be taken back, and Flo, for the first time, said things in return. Not cruel things, but honest ones, specific ones. The kind of honesty that burns off the false version of a relationship and leaves behind either something real or nothing at all. It left behind something real, small and fragile, but real. His father, confronted with the specific person his son had spent 19 years becoming while trying to become what was wanted. That father, at 60, found something he hadn't expected. A son worth knowing. It took time. It was imperfect. But it began. Flo moved to a different city. He found work that used what his body could do in ways that felt like his own choice. He ran a training program eventually, not the rigorous, joyless architecture his father had built, but something that asked first, what do you love? What does your body want to do? He was good at it. He called Geordie sometimes, late at night, the way old friends call when you want to talk to someone who knew you before you figured yourself out. Flo asked once. Geordie thought about it. About 400 meters of rubber and lane paint, and a slow revelation of what was actually inside you when you had nothing left to hide behind. Sometimes, he said, me too. A comfortable silence. You doing okay? Geordie asked. Flo considered the question, honestly, the way Geordie had asked it that first time in the empty arena, and the way he'd been learning to sit with it ever since. Yeah, he said. Good. Outside Geordie's window, wherever he was that night, it was quiet. Somewhere in Harlow Creek, his parents were asleep in a house that was warm. His sister was dreaming about horses. The mountain was still there, the way it had always been, but the valley below it had changed, just a little, and in 100 different ways, none of them fully visible from any single angle. 65 families were still carrying forward what they'd found in the hours they'd given, in the arena that had asked them all, what are you made of, really? The answers had been as different as the families themselves, but they'd all shown up. Every one of them had showed up. And in Harlow Creek, which didn't appear on most maps, that still meant something. That had always meant something.